Hey everyone, it's Tim. I apologize that my camera's not working for some reason. I'm going to have to get that troubleshooted. But I just want to check in with you all after a really good first week. It's always fun to get back into the discussion boards and to get to know you all a little bit through the paragraphs at all, and also just seeing the discussion that you all had and then jumping in myself as well. So overall, everything's going really well. I know some people have emailed me about questions about the discussion board and lab for this week, and always feel free to send me an email when questions arise or post that in the Q&A discussion board for the rest of the class to see. I just want to jump in on a couple of things that I observed from the discussion board, particularly this week. And that's really the tough thing about understanding what exactly an observational study is. Because when we hear observation, we think of like actually watching someone, observing someone. Which is true. So if you do a study observing play behavior of kids in an early childhood education center, that would be an observational study. Another way you can look at observational study is survey data. So we can survey people perhaps on their smoking habits or sleeping habits, and we can look at if sleeping habits differ depending on the type of work people do, or gender, or age, or anything like that. That also too would be an observational study because we're observing what people do and characteristics of the people. Another thing is the aspect of cost of study. Some people said experiments are more costly. Some say observational studies are more costly. What's important to know is both can be cheap and both can be costly. So big NIH, National Institute of Health experiments, randomized experiments on drugs are very, very expensive. But you can also do a randomized experiment. Some people do it in colleges with teaching. So sometimes people get randomly placed into one class that is one teaching method, and another group will be randomly placed in another, and they compare the outcomes of students based on that. Observational studies can also be cheap if you just go in a park and observe family interactions. That's pretty cheap. But sometimes observational studies can be very expensive if you're collecting survey data on thousands of people. So it's just important to know. Another thing is sometimes we have to make cause and effect references based on observational studies, which we're going to get more into this week. But typically, you can't make a cause and effect relationship from one observational study. So a good example is smoking. So we can't randomly place people into smoking or not smoking. It's unethical, as all of you know. But it's important to know that over time, if you consistently do different observational studies on smoking patterns and outcomes in terms of death or illness or cancer or whatever, oftentimes based on the amount of data, we can start to make conclusions on cause and effect as we continue to rule out other factors. It's a lot more time consuming, and it's also a little bit more imprecise as compared to experiments, but sometimes, especially based on ethics or on variables that we can't change, such as like handedness and gender and all that stuff. The last couple things is validity and reliability, which a couple people point out that it is really interesting to think about that something can be valid but not reliable, and something can be reliable but not valid. So something can be valid in terms of they measure what you want to measure. So say you want to measure weight, and so using a scale would be a valid measure to use. But maybe I weigh about 180 pounds, but maybe the scale reliably weighs me in at 220 pounds or 120 pounds. It's reliable in the fact that it always gives the same, but it's actually not a good measure in terms of actually weight, in terms of the accurate weight. So it's just important to think about, and it's something that I think as the class moves on, a lot of these concepts are going to come up time and time and time again. So you'll start maybe connecting dots from week 1, maybe in week 7, as we continue to move on about observational experimental studies and samples and all that. But the important thing to know is you guys are doing really well, and just keep up the good work. I know that this is a class sometimes it's a little bit challenging, and there's a lot of new a lot of new definitions, a lot of new things to think about, even compared to maybe the prereq class that you took. Sometimes there'll be similarities, sometimes there'll be differences, but keep hanging in there, and feel free to always send me an email, or if you're an on-campus student, I can always meet with you in person. So I'm here for you, and keep it up, everyone, and take care. Have a good rest of your work week.